Elton John's father never hugged him. Not once. Not when he won his first piano competition at age 11. Not when he got accepted to the Royal Academy of Music. Not when he became the biggest rock star in the world. 41 years of silence. 41 years of a hand that never reached out. 41 years of wondering what he had done wrong. And then in 1988, Stanley Dwight showed up at the hospital where his son was recovering from throat surgery. He walked into the room, looked at the man who had sold 300 million records, and finally explained why. What he said would haunt Elton John for the rest of his life. To understand the weight of that hospital room conversation, you have to go back to the beginning, to a small house in Pinner, a suburb of London, where a little boy named Reginald Kenneth Dwight spent his childhood trying to earn his father's love. Stanley Dwight was a flight lieutenant in the Royal Air Force, tall, rigid, a trumpet player in the RAF band, who believed that discipline was the highest virtue and emotion was the greatest weakness. He had grown up in a household where men didn't cry, didn't complain, and certainly didn't hug their children. He married Sheila Harris in 1945, just after the war ended. Their son Reggie was born 2 years later, on March 25. From the very beginning, something was wrong. Stanley was never home. His RAF duties kept him away for months at a time, and when he did return, he treated the house like a barracks. There were rules, there was order, there was no warmth. My father was a stranger who occasionally appeared, Elton would later recall. He'd walk through the door and I'd feel my whole body tense up. I was always waiting for him to criticize something. The way I sat, the way I spoke, the fact that I preferred piano to football. Sheila tried to bridge the gap. She saw how Reggie's eyes would light up when his father's car pulled into the driveway, and she saw how that light would dim within minutes of Stanley walking through the door. "Say hello to your father, Reggie." "Hello, Dad." Stanley would nod, maybe grunt. Then he'd disappear into another room with his newspaper. That was the extent of their relationship. His grandmother was playing the Skater's Waltz on the family piano, and the toddler climbed onto the bench and played it back perfectly, by ear, without a single lesson. Sheila was astonished. The neighbors were called over to witness the miracle. Everyone agreed, this child was special. Everyone except Stanley. "It's a party trick," he said dismissively. "Won't amount to anything. The boy needs to focus on practical skills." But Sheila persisted. She enrolled Reggie in piano lessons. She scraped together money for sheet music. She sat beside him for hours as he practiced, her eyes shining with pride. When Reggie was 11 years old, he auditioned for the Royal Academy of Music, one of the most prestigious conservatories in the world. He played a piece by Handel, his small fingers dancing across the keys with a precision that made the examiners lean forward in their seats. He was accepted, a junior scholarship. Every Saturday, young Reggie Dwight would take the train into London to study classical piano alongside students twice his age. Sheila cried when she heard the news. She pulled her son into a fierce embrace and told him she had always known he was destined for greatness. Stanley's reaction was different. "Don't let it go to his head," he told Sheila, "and make sure it doesn't interfere with his real education. He'll need proper qualifications for a proper job. No hug. No congratulations. No I'm proud of you, son. Just a warning not to dream too big." The breaking point came in 1962, when Reggie was 15 years old. Stanley had met another woman. Her name was Edna, and she worked at the same base where Stanley was stationed. The affair had been going on for months, maybe years, and when Sheila finally discovered the truth, the marriage collapsed. Stanley moved out. He filed for divorce, and within a year he had married Edna and started a new family. A new family with new children. Reggie watched from the sidelines as his father built the life he had apparently always wanted, just with different people. Stanley had 4 sons with Edna, 4 boys he coached in football, 4 boys he took to matches on weekends, 4 boys he hugged when they scored goals, 4 boys who got the father Reggie had always wanted. That was when I realized, Elton said decades later, his voice catching. "It wasn't that my father didn't know how to show love. He just didn't want to show it to me." The rejection was total. Stanley rarely visited. He sent money occasionally, court-ordered child support, but the emotional checks never arrived. Birthdays passed without cards. Christmases came and went without calls. By the time Reggie Dwight transformed himself into Elton John, his father was essentially a stranger. But strangers don't have the power to hurt you. And Stanley Dwight still had that power, more than Elton wanted to admit. The 1970s happened. Elton John exploded onto the world stage like a supernova in platform shoes. Your song in 9 Rocket Man, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. In 9 hit after hit after hit, each one bigger than the last. He played Madison Square Garden. He filled Dodger Stadium. He performed for the Queen of England. He became one of the most famous human beings on the planet. And through it all, Stanley Dwight said nothing. Not when Elton's face appeared on the cover of Time magazine. Not when he was named the biggest-selling solo artist of the decade. Not when other fathers would have been bursting with pride. Nothing. Elton tried to tell himself it didn't matter. He had Bernie Taupin, his lyricist and soulmate, who understood him better than anyone. He had millions of fans who screamed his name every night. He had more money than he could ever spend, more fame than he could ever need. But late at night, alone in hotel rooms around the world, the same thought would surface. Why wasn't I good enough? He tried to fill the void with everything he could find: cocaine, alcohol, shopping binges that cost hundreds of thousands of pounds, relationships that burned bright and flamed out. Nothing worked. You can sell out Wembley Stadium, Elton once said, but if your father never told you he loved you, you still feel like a failure. The absence had become a presence. Stanley's silence was louder than any cheering crowd. In 1984, Elton married a woman named Renee Blauel. It was, by his own later admission, an attempt to be normal, to prove something, to the world, to himself, maybe to his father. See, I can have a wife. I can have the kind of life you wanted for me. Stanley came to the wedding. It was the first time Elton had seen his father in years. The ceremony was in Sydney, Australia, a lavish affair with hundreds of guests, flowers everywhere, the kind of spectacle that only a rock star could arrange. And there was Stanley sitting in the church, watching his son get married to a woman. For a moment, Elton allowed himself to hope. Maybe this would be the turning point. Maybe now, finally, his father would see him as worthy. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Elton found himself standing near his father, the space between them charged with years of unspoken words. It was a lovely service, Stanley said. Thank you for coming, Dad. An awkward pause. She seems like a nice girl. She is. Another pause. The moment stretched. This was it. The opening for Stanley to say something more, to acknowledge his son's success, his journey, his worth. Stanley cleared his throat. Well, congratulations. Then he walked away to get another drink. 4 years later, the marriage was over. Elton had finally admitted to himself, and the world, that he was gay. The attempt to be normal had failed, and his father once again said nothing. The phone call came on a grey London morning in night. Elton had just had surgery on his throat. Years of performing, combined with bulimia and substance abuse, had damaged his vocal cords. The doctors had removed polyps, and warned him that if he didn't change his lifestyle, he might never sing again. He was at his home in Windsor, recovering when Sheila called with news he never expected to hear. Your father wants to see you. Elton almost laughed. What? Stanley called. He heard about your surgery. He wants to come visit. 20 years. It had been nearly 20 years since they'd had anything resembling a real conversation. And now, out of nowhere, his father wanted to visit. Did he say why? No. Just that he wants to see you. Elton spent the next 2 days in a state of anxious anticipation. He cleaned the house. Absurd, given that he had staff who did that. He practiced what he might say. He rehearsed casual conversation in front of the mirror. He was 41 years old. He had performed for presidents and princesses, but the thought of facing his father turned him back into that little boy in Pinner, desperate for approval. Stanley arrived on a Saturday afternoon. He had aged. That was Elton's first thought. The rigid military bearing had softened into something closer to frail. His hair was gray, his face lined with years. He walked with a slight stoop. They sat in Elton's living room, a room filled with gold records and awards. Evidence of a career beyond anything Stanley could have imagined. You've done well for yourself, Stanley said, looking around. Thank you. Silence. How's the throat? Healing. Doctors say I'll be fine. Good. That's good. More silence. Elton felt the familiar frustration building. 20 years and they were making small talk like strangers at a bus stop. Dad, he finally said. Why are you here? Stanley looked at him, really looked at him. Maybe for the first time in decades. I heard you nearly died. On the operating table. It was serious. Yes, and I thought. Stanley's voice faltered. I thought I should come, before it's too late. Too late for what? The question hung in the air. Outside, birds were singing. A car passed on the road, normal sounds from a normal world. While inside this room, 41 years of history pressed down like a physical weight. I know I wasn't a good father, Stanley said quietly. Elton felt something crack inside him. All those years, all that pain, and now his father was sitting here, admitting it like it was a simple fact. No, Elton said, you weren't. I didn't know how to be. That's not an excuse. I know. Stanley's hands were clasped in his lap. He was staring at them, unable to meet his son's eye. My father never hugged me either, he said. Not once. He was a hard man. Cold. I grew up thinking that's what fathers were supposed to be. And you decided to continue the tradition. I didn't decide anything. I just didn't know any other way. Elton stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the garden, needing distance. His throat was tight, and not from the surgery. Do you have any idea, he said, what it did to me, watching you hug your other sons, going to their football matches, being the father to them that you never were to me? I know. Then why, Dad? Why them and not me? The question he had been asking his whole life, the question that fueled hit songs and substance abuse, and a desperate, endless search for love. Stanley was quiet for a long moment, because by the time I figured out how, he finally said, you didn't need me anymore. Elton turned around. What? You were famous. You were Elton John. You had everything. Money. Success. Millions of people who loved you. Stanley's voice cracked. What could I possibly give you that you didn't already have? A father. Elton whispered. All I ever wanted was a father. The tears came then, for both of them. Stanley Dwight, the man who never showed emotion, was crying in his son's living room. And Elton, the showman, the star, the man who had everything, was crying for the little boy who had never been hugged. I was scared, Stanley admitted. When you were young, I was scared of getting too close, scared of being soft, scared of raising a weak son. And then when you grew up, I was scared that I'd missed my chance, that you'd reject me if I tried. So you rejected me first. Yes. And I've regretted it every day since. They stood there, father and son, separated by 41 years and 3 feet of carpet. The distance felt immeasurable. I can't give you back your childhood, Stanley said. I can't undo what I did, but I can tell you something I should have said a long time ago. He took a breath. I'm proud of you, Reginald. I've always been proud of, from the moment you played that song on your grandmother's piano. I knew you were special. I just didn't know how to say it. They didn't hug that day. 41 years of distance couldn't be erased in one afternoon. But something shifted. A door that had been locked for decades opened. Just a crack. Over the next 3 years, Elton and Stanley saw each other occasionally. Awkward visits, stilted conversations, 2 men trying to build a relationship from the rubble of the one they should have had. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Old resentments would surface, and one or both of them would retreat. But they kept trying. And then in December 1991, Stanley Dwight died. He was 70 years old. A heart attack. Sudden and final. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. Elton didn't go to the funeral. The press criticized him for it. How could he not attend his own father's funeral? What kind of son does that? But the people who knew Elton understood. The funeral wasn't for him. It was for Stanley's other family. The wife and sons who had gotten the best of him. Elton didn't belong there. He never had. Instead, he grieved privately. And he threw himself into his music with a ferocity that surprised even his closest friend. In July 1990, 18 months before his father's death, Elton had made a decision that changed his life. After decades of addiction, after countless interventions, after nearly dying more times than he could count, he finally got sober. He checked into a rehabilitation facility and began the long, painful work of confronting his demons. And the biggest demon, he discovered, was his father. Everything came back to Stanley, Elton said years later. The drugs, the drinking, the desperate need for approval. It all came from that house in Pinner. From that little boy who just wanted his dad to hug him. Sobriety didn't erase the pain, but it gave him the tools to process it, to understand that his father's failures weren't about him, to recognize that Stanley had been broken long before Reggie was born. Hurt people, Elton said. My father's father wounded him, and my father wounded me. The cycle just kept going. But cycles can be broken. In 2010, Elton John became a father himself. His first son, Zachary, was born on Christmas Day. 2 years later came Elijah, 2 boys who would never wonder whether their father loved them. The first time I held Zachary, Elton remembered, I made a promise. I said, you will never doubt that you are loved. You will never go a day without hearing it. And I will hug you so much you'll get sick of it. He kept that promise. Friends who visit Elton's home describe a father transformed. He's at every school event. He coaches football, actually coaches, getting down on his knees in the grass, cheering wildly at every goal. He reads bedtime stories. He gives endless hugs. I'm not trying to overcompensate, Elton explained. I'm just doing what should be natural, what should have been done for me. David Furnish, Elton's husband, has watched this transformation with awe. When I first met Elton, David said, he was convinced he would never have a family. He thought he didn't deserve one. That wound from his father ran so deep. And now he's the most devoted father I've ever seen. He broke the cycle. That's his greatest achievement. Not the record sales, not the awards, the fact that his children will never feel what he felt. Elton is 78 years old now. He's retired from touring. The farewell Yellow Brick Road tour, the longest-running concert tour in history, ended in 2023. He lives quietly in Windsor with David and their 2 sons, surrounded by art and memories. When interviewers ask about his father, Elton doesn't deflect anymore. He doesn't minimize or make jokes. He simply tells the truth. My father never hugged me, he says, and that fact shaped my entire life. The drugs, the fame, the desperate need to be loved. It all came from that absence. He pauses. But here's what I've learned. You can't change the past. You can only change what you do with it. My father gave me a wound. I turned that wound into fuel, into songs, into a foundation that's raised over $600 million for AIDS research, and into the kind of father you wanted to be. Elton smiled. And there's something in that smile, something peaceful, that wasn't there before. Exactly, into the kind of father I wanted to be. The house in Pinner is still there. It's unremarkable now. Just another suburban home on a quiet street. There's no plaque, no mark, nothing to indicate that a future legend grew up behind those walls, waiting for a hug that never came. Sometimes people say, you can see an elderly man parked outside. He sits in an expensive car, engine off, just looking at the house. He doesn't get out, doesn't knock on the door, just sits and remembers. The little boy at the piano, the father who couldn't love him, the 41 years of silence, and the 3 words that finally came. Too late, but not too late to matter. I'm proud of you. Stanley Dwight never hugged his son, but Elton John has hugged his sons every single day of their lives. And that more than the platinum records, more than the sold-out stadiums, more than the standing ovations is his real legacy. The cycle is broken. The silence is over. The boy from Pinner finally found the love he was looking for. He just had to become a father himself to find it.